At 43, I was losing words mid-sentence and I thought that I was getting Alzheimer's, which was terrifying. And spoiler alert, it was not Alzheimer's. However, it was something significant, and if you literally feel like you're losing your mind as well during this stage of life, you are not alone, and I'm going to talk about what I did today to get my brain back. Okay, friend. So the worst of it began at 43, but at 42, I was losing my mind at work. I was making mistakes that I have never made in my life. Or I should say, I was making mistakes that were really uncharacteristic for me. And it was stuff like spelling mistakes that I probably hadn't made since elementary school. It was stuff like getting off work on Friday, coming back on Monday, and having almost no recollection of exactly what it was that I did. So coming back to work tasks was like, now what was going on with this? It's just, I couldn't access the things that I could normally access. And then there were the mood problems. I was completely losing my crap about things that I could normally handle well. I mean, I had 5 teenagers at the time, and I'm pretty resilient. I'm pretty relaxed. I have dealt with a lot in my life. And all of a sudden, things that I could have dealt with and handled pretty steady before, I was completely losing my mind, like incendiary anger about things that, yes, were annoying, yes, were not very respectful, but I was just like, I was a screecher. I was a screecher at that time, which, you know, only has happened to me in my life when I'm extremely overstimulated. And yeah, I can remember some times of young parenting where I was a screecher and where I was just like, had so much anger in my body that I felt like I was going to explode or, you know, burn my house down. It felt extremely out of control. I tend to be a pretty steady person. I tend to roll with the punches, and none of that was true during that period. And then came the nail in the coffin. That was probably after I had turned 43, and I was looking for words on a regular basis, and it was like there was a complete blank for words that I knew that I knew. So it wasn't like, oh, I can't think of the word. It was like, there's no word there. It's like I had never learned the word. And it felt like holes in my memory. It was very, very scary. And part of the reason that was particularly terrifying was because my mom has Alzheimer's, and she is pretty far along for somebody who's 75. That was fresh on my mind. She had been diagnosed several years before. The decline had seemed very shocking to me. And so when I began losing words and not being able to remember what did I do in my job 2 days ago, it was terrifying because I don't want to get Alzheimer's. I am afraid to get Alzheimer's. I don't want that for myself. And I think it was pretty logical of me to be afraid of that simply because I didn't have any clue that there was anything else that could cause this kind of memory symptoms. It looked a lot like what my mom was experiencing at 30 years older than me with an Alzheimer's diagnosis. So that was the situation. And I just have to make a quick aside because my friend Lori Hatteen, she's a wonderful poet. One time she said about one of her children, he didn't understand the scope of the situation. So, what I'm sharing with you is the scope of the situation. And in her case, it was how he casually mentioned that he was getting bit by bugs in his bed, and then they had to like throw the mattresses out the window because of bed bugs that had been acquired from a thrift store. So, anyway, the scope of the situation was pretty bad at 42 and 43 for me, and it was quite scary. When I began to wonder about how things are happening in the world and what is going on with my brain, I began to research, I think a lot of it was in bed, like signs of Alzheimer's. How do you know that you don't have Alzheimer's? And it became clear to me that perhaps some of the struggles that I was having with my brain at that time had to do with my estrogen declining, not Alzheimer's. So it wasn't Alzheimer's, it actually was estrogen for me. I was in perimenopause. My estrogen was very inconsistent. It was beginning to tank. And please hear me, just because it wasn't Alzheimer's, estrogen and Alzheimer's have some interesting connections. And that is because estrogen helps your brain health. So I'm not saying here that estrogen leaving your system will mean that you're going to get Alzheimer's. I'm not saying that putting estrogen in your system will protect you from getting Alzheimer's. What I am saying is I was shocked to learn some of the functions of how estrogen protects the ways that your brain and your body function that keep your brain healthy. Estrogen plays a big role in a lot of brain and bodily functions. So the decline in estrogen that comes in menopause, but also begins happening in perimenopause, is linked to increased Alzheimer's risk. So it isn't a causal, I don't know if you're familiar with that science study term, like it's not a causal relation, but it is linked because estrogen protects some really crucial brain functions. And you have to make up for the way that estrogen is not in your system with other ways of helping those brain functions. I am not a medical professional. I am just a really big nerd who likes to understand how my brain and my body works. And so I research things to death, especially because this is such an understudied area in medicine. I have heard a lot of doctors online talk about how they had a 90-minute session on menopause. And so I think that doctors, while being extremely educated and understanding if they read these studies much more than I understand them, haven't widely had a lot of training on this particular subject, which is really annoying since it affects roughly half the population of the entire Earth. So for me, the root cause of my brain distress and my mood distress and all of my distress at that time, maybe it wasn't all of my distress, I would say it was affecting quite a lot of things. It was affecting the way that I was able to handle my life or not handle my life. And the root cause was my estrogen was tanking because I was in perimenopause. So here is the laundry list of scientific explanations for how estrogen helps support functions in your brain and body that protect your brain and keeps your brain working well. I'm going to be working from my notes because I don't want to give you incorrect information. Okay, so there's a few ways that I wanted to share that I was surprised and interested by the way that estrogen helps your brains, helps our brains. It's not an exhaustive list, but I thought these were really interesting. So there's this thing. It's called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor. It's like my nerd alert right now. Why this matters is because the layman's way of explaining this seems to be it's like fertilizer for your brain. So I'm going to read to you from my notes because I want to make sure I get it right. So estrogen helps create an environment where brain cells can grow stronger connections and maintain the memory center of your brain, which is called the hippocampus. So BDNF, the brain fertilizer, is one of the tools that it uses to do that. I think I'm going to have to look this up. So estrogen, specifically estradiol, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It helps regulate and support production. Estradiol is in a variety of HRT. It's also in certain kinds of birth control. And so, anyway, that's what that is. But what it does is help your brain as it creates brain derived neurotropic factor, BDNF. This is important for obvious reasons. If it's helping your brain communicate and it's helping your brain have stronger connections, brain connections is one of the things that breaks down in Alzheimer's. Keeping your brain making the connections between different parts, especially in your hippocampus where your memory is centered, is one way of keeping your brain healthy instead of what happens during Alzheimer's, where the hippocampus is, what is the word I'm looking for? This is not exactly the situation because I know it's on the tip of my tongue, which is different than what was happening to me before. But because I have ADHD, I lost my train of thought. So at any rate, you can feel free to put it in the comments, the word I'm looking for, but we want our hippocampus working, friends. BDNF helps that. Second thing, glucose processing. So this was news to me, but your brain basically runs on glucose. However, just because there's glucose in your bloodstream does not mean that your brain is turning it into food. There's processes from which the glucose that goes into your body has to be processed and metabolized into something, my dog, into something that your brain can use for fuel. So your brain has to somehow get the glucose from your body, from your bloodstream, into the cells, and then it has to process it into fuel for your brain to do what it needs to do. Estrogen helps that glucose to brain fuel system. And when estrogen declines, the efficiency of that system of metabolizing the glucose and turning it into fuel for your brain, that system gets less efficient. Okay, so I'm going to read this part because I don't want to get it wrong. One marker of Alzheimer's is metabolic dysfunction. So the way that your body is processing glucose, specifically turning glucose into fuel for your brain cells. And so that means that the brain gets less effective at turning glucose into fuel. So the brain is surrounded by food if you have glucose in your body, but it cannot turn it into energy and food for the brain cells. So that's a problem. Estrogen helps protect the systems that help you process glucose and turn it into brain food. Next, another thing that estrogen does. Okay, this are the points at which your brain communicates to other parts of your brain. So it's how your brain cells communicate to each other. Estrogen helps those connection points, those synapses, stay strong and flexible. And when you have Alzheimer's, those connections are breaking down. So it makes it hard for different parts of the brain to communicate to each other, which I think if you've ever met someone with Alzheimer's, this would make sense to you. I'm just going to leave it at that. Their brains are not efficiently along good pathways with good connections able to integrate all the parts of the brain so that it functions in the way that it's supposed to. Also, in my case, estrogen helps support the brain connections around memory and language. So when I was losing words, completely finding blanks for words, that was related to estrogen decline. And I mean, my estrogen throughout perimenopause, it's variable, right? So when your estrogen drops, your retrieval of both memories, language, things like that gets less reliable. I think that that's really the best way to put it. My brain felt extremely unreliable during that period when I did not have any sort of intervention with the estrogen in my body. So based on this, I'm going to share some of my non-negotiables that have helped me out in the last few years get my brain back. And then I'm going to explain a little bit about why those things actually move the needle, having your brain feel like it's functioning better. So for obvious reasons, once I got estrogen back into my system, all of those processes I just talked to you about stabilized and had the support that they needed and that they were lacking and having to look for support elsewhere. But I think the inconsistency of it is what's maddening and what just feels unhelpful for a stage of life where if you are a mom or an adult daughter, you're helping your friends, you're doing your job. This is a really intense time of life. And so to have your brain feel inconsistent and unreliable, it's not only scary, but it's just really frustrating and unhelpful. So what I did to get that word I can't pronounce, estradiol, into my body again was actually just starting birth control. COC birth control is what they call it. It's the one that has like both estrogen and progestin in it. So it's birth control pills, and I had not taken those before. So introducing those into my system really, really helped stabilize my emotions, give me access back to the things that I was missing, like words. I no longer have those moments where I completely blank on a word. Maybe my recall is not always like super fast, or there's the tip of the tongue thing. But that also, I think, has to do with my ADHD. And so the severity of the symptoms that I was having with my brain have almost exclusively stabilized. For me, the reason that I did birth control is because trying to convince a Portuguese doctor when you are 43 years old that actually perimenopause is a thing that's affecting your brain significantly and you're crying in the office and they just don't get it because HRT is not very common, at least it doesn't seem to be part of the discussion with gynecologists, even ones who had been recommended as maybe being the kind who's willing to give you HRT here in Portugal. So a lot of, I think, my research penchant, my penchant for researching has to do with the fact that I've been living abroad for 7 years now and in different places with different medical norms. And the easiest way to get estrogen into my system here in Portugal was getting a birth control prescription. You actually can just get it over the counter here, but specifically, I was glad that I went to the gynecologist because she prescribed one that was a lower dose than what you would have and need earlier in your life. And it also means that when I'm on my off days, the drop isn't so extreme, and this particular one doesn't have a full week of not having estrogen in your system. So like that's more information that you needed. But I will just say that this was the number one thing for getting my brain back, is figuring out a way to get estrogen into my system. But there are other science-backed things that I have been doing in an effort to protect my brain. I'm trying to be very proactive. While estrogen has made a huge difference for me, I'm also trying to have a holistic approach to longevity and staying healthy and keeping my brain healthy, especially because of the genetic. I don't know if I have a genetic predisposition because my mom has Alzheimer's, but the fact that it's in my family is definitely concerning to me. And so I want to be as proactive as I can with my brain. So one way that I do this, a scientifically proven way to protect your brain, is increasing that brain fertilizer, the BDNF. Never going to get that quite right. You can increase that through resistance exercise. Now, I am not where I want to be completely with exercise. But it also does not have to be as complicated as everybody seems to make it out to be. Like, you don't have to be a weightlifter to have resistance exercise as part of your life and to have the benefits, which is the BDNF, that increases when you do resistance exercise. So for me, actually, resistance exercise looks like things that I've integrated into my life because I live here in Portugal. Portugal, I think, is going to really come in clutch for protecting my brain. I walk more here, which is very good for brain health, but also for the resistance piece. I walk 10 minutes to the grocery store pretty briskly, and then I carry heavy bags back to my house 10 minutes. And having that as part of my pretty much daily routine, sometimes Andrew takes that, having some sort of resistance, heavy lifting as part of your routine is really good for your body. And it doesn't have to be lifting weights, though my goal right now is that if Andrew is the one doing the grocery shopping during the day, I want to make sure that not only am I climbing the zillion stairs in my townhouse all day, just doing mother tasks, but that I'm adding in some squats, some weighted squats if I can. We do have weightlifting stuff, but we don't really have a good setup for where it is. So I'm literally just going to be holding like the plate and doing some heavy weighted squats on days that I am not doing the grocery shopping run. So the reason that this matters is because not only does the brain fertilizer thing happen? Whoops. Okay, just got a delivery. Ran down those stairs and up those stairs again. Oh, good. Just what we need. My dog, hypervigilanting. Okay, so resistance exercise helps your body handle glucose better. So if you remember, there's the metabolic stuff with glucose that's happening that affects the way that your brain processes glucose and accesses it for fuel. So resistance exercise helps your brain and body process glucose more efficiently. And that supports healthier blood vessels and brain metabolism, which are all important for reducing your Alzheimer's risk. Okay, this is one I'm very passionate about and is one of the top things that you can do to help your brain out. Sleep. Sleep. I like to say about my life that if I have sleep, I can handle my life. And if I don't have sleep, I cannot indeed handle my life. So there's that. However, sleep is also a really critical time for your brain's recovery. And here's 4 things I'm going to read to you that happen during deep sleep. Your brain clears waste. It regulates inflammation. It restores energy systems. And it consolidates memory. So poor or fragmented sleep is associated with a greater risk of dementia or Alzheimer's. So for me, I take that so seriously that when I began having really disrupted sleep, I figured out that I was okay with taking medication to help me get deeper, longer, less interrupted sleep. So I take a medication called trazodone, and it's very effective for certain kinds of deep sleep, which we will not go into here, but it works for me and it has pretty low side effects. I'm more concerned with the benefits of it, so that's why I've decided to take that to deal with my insomnia, because it was very frustrating. I feel like there is not any worse feeling than laying in your bed when you're trying very hard to take care of yourself and get sleep, and it's just elusive. So that's been a great solution for me, and I know that my brain is benefiting from getting that consistent sleep. Okay, and here's the 4th thing that is scientifically backed by many studies, and also that I have incorporated into my life to get my brain back. And that is taking omega-3s with DHA. A high dose, according to some, is 2,000 to 3,000. I think I'm aiming to take 2,200 or something of the omega-3s. And then it has, I don't know, however much DHA is in that dose. But both are important, and that is for several reasons. DHA and omegas can help reduce brain inflammation. So it helps your brain resolve chronic inflammation. Chronic inflammation? No. It helps your brain resolve inflammation, and chronic inflammation is one of the processes that is a marker in Alzheimer's. So, to sum everything up for you, you are not crazy if you are losing words. There might be a biological explanation for it, friend. And if we want to be thriving and having a life that we actually enjoy and working on our goals and having a midlife reawakening or a midlife reinvention, or just trying to make it through all of the freaking things we have to do As a woman in our 40s, we can't do those things if our bodies are not stable and if we are all over the map and we don't feel like we can rely on our brain. Like, this is baseline for a lot of the other things that I talk about here, just about, dreaming and envisioning a future that you enjoy and doing the things that you love. Just trying to like being alive. All of those things are much harder when your body is not taken care of. And I'm not saying that as an accusation. I'm just saying when your body is not something you feel like you can rely on anymore, there are medical reasons for that. There are scientific explanations for what you may be dealing with. And it's worth it to take the time to make sure that those things are okay and in order and that you just support yourself. It doesn't have to be this way with your brain. If you're scared, if you are dealing with symptoms similar to what I was when I thought I was getting early Alzheimer's, it doesn't have to be that way. And I don't know for sure that you don't have early Alzheimer's, but I do know what my experience was, and I did not. So if this hit a nerve for you, I really hope that it was helpful, first of all, and helps you see that feeling better might not be as complicated as you have been led to believe. And also, I hope you stick around because ideally we would be figuring out these foundational things so that we can move on to more interesting things in our lives that we're more passionate about and would like to be doing if our body was cooperating. So let's help our bodies cooperate by taking care of them as best we can and getting the support that we need. You are worth it. I am worth it. My name is Andy. I am here to remind you to find the beauty wherever you can find it so that encourages you and buoys you to deal with all of the things that are going on in your life and in the world. I'll see you tomorrow.